In April, 15-year-old Connor Bennett took his own life at Brighter Path, Tuskegee, a youth residential facility in Alabama where he'd been staying for treatment. Bennett's family filed a lawsuit alleging Bennett killed himself because of repeated physical and verbal abuse by staff and sexual abuse by other residents. The company that owns the facility, Vivant Behavioral Health, said in a filing that the allegations are false and that its program employs a culture of zero harm. But the history of the facility Bennett died in is fraught. Brighter Path used to be owned by Sequel Youth and Family Services, a company we investigated for more than a year after the death of a 16-year-old boy in Michigan. He was restrained on the floor by several adults for more than 12 minutes. Were you surprised that that restraint killed Cornelius?
Yeah, I was very surprised. That's nowhere near the worst restraint I've seen in a Sequel facility.
We found scores of violation reports and complaints at Sequel facilities around the country and talked to dozens of former staff and residents who described a chaotic environment and profit-driven approach.
Still to this day, I have no idea why anyone thought that having kids with no charges and bad trauma issues to be in a residential facility with violent kids was a good idea.
After a firestorm of bad press, Sequel closed about half its facilities and sold most of the rest. Vivant is run by one of Sequel's founders. That company bought up several facilities. Attorney Tommy James represents the Bennett family. He says these facilities changed ownership in name only.
It's a PR move for them, though. I mean, rebranding into whatever it took for them to get from Sequel to Vivant. I mean, nobody's heard of Vivant right now in the country. Everybody's heard of Sequel. I mean, it's the same players, the same folks are involved in it from top down.
Does it make it harder to get information about this company if they're constantly changing their name and their ownership structure?
Of course, it makes it a little more difficult because you don't really know who we're dealing with. But we're dealing with the same executive director usually of the facility, regardless of the name they're calling themselves that day. We're dealing with the same people who abused and neglected the children that we're representing.
Can you tell me about Connor Bennett, who is your latest client?
He was 15 years old when he was placed in Sequel, and he had developed some behavioral problems, and his family, they needed to get him help. He was there for approximately 5 or 6 months. He was bullied incessantly. Like all the other residents that were there, he was treated poorly by staff. There was physical abuse by staff. Connor started being sexually abused by another resident at the facility. In April, he couldn't handle it anymore, and he hung himself in his room.
Who do you think is most responsible for the horrific cases of abuse that we keep hearing about?
I think it's top down. It's a Sequel problem. The folks dealing with them on a day-to-day basis aren't being trained properly. They're not being vetted properly. They're not being paid enough. And in fact, Sequel has been known to cut staff to increase their profits. It's a for-profit business. That's what they're about, profit, profit, profit.
How much was the state of Alabama paying Sequel/Brighter Path for Connor's stay?
The last number I have was $325 per child per day. Based on my experience, I've seen Sequel across the country get anywhere from $300 to $900 per child per day.
He did whatever he could to make sure he was in good graces.
After Cornelius Frederick died at the Sequel facility in Michigan, the company told us that they were going to eliminate restraints at their facility as well as move towards a trauma-informed care model that they said was basically going to fix a lot of the problems that led to abuse in the facilities. Has that happened?
No. I've gotten calls about still these children being slammed to the ground, slammed against the walls, and I'm talking about by staff, not necessarily the other residents, which is a problem too.
Do you feel like these facilities are trauma-informed?
No, they're not trauma-informed. And these are children who 99% of the time have suffered tremendous trauma already, and they're placed in these facilities and they're being re-traumatized daily. How are you not re-traumatized living in those kind of conditions with no furniture in your room, laying on a cement mattress basically with no bedding, broken windows, broken doors?
In 2020, the Alabama Disability Advocacy Program released a report showing evidence of unsafe conditions at a different Sequel facility in the state. It wrote a letter to state officials, warning them not to wait for the death of a child before severing ties with Sequel.
I hate to have to say it again, but what is it going to take? How many children have to die before it gets our elected officials' attention? I can't come up with the right word to describe other than houses of horror, hellholes, torture chambers, all of the above.
That's not melodramatic?
No. That's life in these facilities. Our elected officials aren't doing anything about it. DHR's not doing anything about it. So we're gonna go to court. We're gonna hold these folks accountable the best we can, because if we hit them in the pocketbook, then there could be change.
We reached out to Alabama's Department of Human Resources, but they declined to answer questions, citing pending litigation. Meanwhile, Vivant said in a statement that although it had purchased programs from Sequel, it was a separate organization and not a rebrand of Sequel. It also said that the facility had no substantiated allegations of youth maltreatment since coming under new management.
I'm Michael Learmonth, editor-in-chief of Vice News. Too often, traditional news outlets shy away from the real stories and experiences of those living through global conflicts. Not Vice News. Our reporters are on the ground, fearlessly covering the human stories that shape our world. You and millions of others can continue to read, watch, and listen to Vice News for free. But we hope you'll consider making a one-time or ongoing contribution of any size at vice.com/contribute. Every contribution, no matter how big or small, helps support the journalism Vice News brings to you every day. Thank you.